What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Influenced. Here on the show, we have another wonderful guest, Michelle Tennant Nicholson, an expert in PR, public relations, who's going to talk about that today, how to grow influence and use it through PR for success for an individual, brand, anyone that might be a professional in their industry, and how to apply it, some tips and tricks, and a whole bunch of other things that Michelle can share with us today. Michelle, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm so stoked to be on with you today.
Likewise, same here. There's a lot I want to ask you and dive into with you today. So
Great.
we'll get right to that. But I'm sure people would also love to learn a bit more about yourself, maybe your backgrounds. What kind of led you down the route of wanting to be in public relations, wanting to be a publicist? Was there any initial inspiration or curiosity there?
Yeah, it's really a funny story. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with Bewitched.
Oh,
And
cool.
but not necessarily, of course there was Tabitha. Who wouldn't love
hmm
Tabitha? But I was really obsessed with Darren and his whole line of work in advertising. And so I
hmm
was always trying to come up with little campaigns when I was little. And then when I went into theater school, that's how I worked myself through theater school in Chicago. Was I worked for a publicist who was working out of her home back in the 90s. So that's what really got me. I got all the skills, and of course I had a theater degree and a master's degree in human development, and I've been doing this for several decades now. But that was how I originally got started, was because I was obsessed with Darren. you know
Wow, that's awesome. Pretty
yeah.
cool. Any particular industry or niche that you wanted to do this in, or did you just kind of want to jump in and see where it kind of took you eventually?
Yeah, sure. So my at the time I was really interested in just making a difference, right? So when I
hmm
started my PR firm with my business partner Drew Gerber, that was back in 2002. One of the things that we had in common is we just wanted to make a difference with the work that we were doing. So
hmm
we focused on actually international nonprofits to start, and we were like with it, like shot out of a cannon that first year in 2002 by the time we started. And then that fall we were in DC. At the time it was President Clinton's backyard, representing a global nonprofit that kept large sibling groups together. So here we are, many decades later, and I still really favor those clients who make a difference. I like to get my teeth sink into what they're doing. And look, we've been really blessed with great clients like ClickFunnels. We currently are representing Mark Sisson, who you might know through the ancestral movement and so forth. And then we also have AI clients like RoboBuy, and
hmm
really we lean into our technology. So if they're not making a difference, then they better be making a huge impact in their industry.
Yeah, what is that difference that you're trying to make? Is it like a specific goal in mind that you're kind of going after, or is it more of like just trying to, help a certain group of people or industry? What's kind of the goal that you had in mind?
Yeah, so I really see like my macro purpose in life is full human development. I have a master's degree in human development, like I said,
hmm
and really looking how do we optimize our experience as humans. And I love, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like once
hmm
we have our roof over our head, we got food on the table, then what's our actual purpose in life? So if clients are having conversations that contribute to our understanding as humans on those macro levels, like what's really driving health, like how can we be healthier, how can we be wealthier, but not only like make more money, but also like just be more satisfied, right? You don't have to make a lot of money to actually be
hmm
satisfied. And then love, like I'm not only talking about like the love that I have with my husband, for the past 20 years, but also like the conversations I'm having with friends, or the intimacy that I experience inside communities. So this is what makes up our lives. And so I'm interested in the conversation about possibility and how we can really make a difference on the planet. So that, yeah, we're here for a short time. So let's have fun. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I think marketing has definitely gone down the route as of, lately in the modern age of trying to grab attention, right? A lot of clickbait, a lot of, things to try and, get us to, go down a certain funnel or buy a certain item or a service. And a lot of times it's, where's the value being added? Where's the humanity in it? it's almost a little predatory sometimes these days. Marketing has definitely gotten very aggressive. So I definitely see the need here for, kind of reeling it back and going about it in a different
Yeah.
way. And it kind of leads into another question I wanted to ask you, because, you've been doing this for like what, 30 years now. You have
Yeah.
tons of
Let's see.
experience.
I'm 50. What am I this year? 56 this year. And I started when I was 20. I started, because I was working myself through undergraduate school.
Yeah.
So a long time. The funny thing is I always say that I used to say that I've seen it move from typewriters to Twitter, but now you can't, X. Well, you can't really tweet anymore. What is that, right? It's like the whole alphabet of change. So
I don't know what to call it anymore.
you get it like, well, I'm going to tweet you. It's just a post, right? It's just an X post or whatever. But that's anyway, long time. Oh,
Yeah.
Old AF over here.
No, you look great. I think you're doing well.
Thanks.
With all that experience and, and getting to see, I think, public relations, PR, evolve over time, especially with the advent of things like social media and Web 2, now moving into Web 3, and, the way we interact with each other online and the way we engage with things, and different generations, different things appeal to different generations of people. How have you seen things change? What's the biggest evolution in this side of the industry that you've noticed throughout your experience and your tenure?
Well, technology is one of the things that I always lean into as a publicist is how we're communicating with each other, the technology of how we're communicating with each other. At the end of the day, it's always about relationships. That's what's really driving our communication. Like, I'm not going to have a conversation with you unless you and I have a good relationship, right? As otherwise you're just going to move on and talk to somebody else. And that's the way the press people are, right? So when we're looking at marketing 101 today, it's really paid, earned, and owned. So paid media, you pay to get your message out with that venue. Owned media, this is things that you own that converts and actually drives whatever you're selling to the populace, right? Earned media, it's what I really specialize in, is the art of having you place in somebody else's paid and owned assets. And that takes a conversation, that takes influence and appeal, right? Why would you want to have my doctor or my scientist on? They've got to have something that's educating, inspiring. It's got to be entertaining, something like that, right? We always say like print and broadcast, when you're developing news headlines and things of that nature, you got to either educate or entertain. Like print people want that scoop and broadcast people want a show. So the way that it's evolved, through the years, is the way that we communicate. It used to be, we had TV and everybody had their news in 4 stations, right? And today it's really exciting because it's infinite. And a lot of people will say whatever they say about our state of affairs, right? Oh, AI this or clickbait that and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome that we have direct communication with our audiences and the ability that everyone has the ability to publish. At one point
Absolutely.
in humanity, we had the printing press and you had to inspire somebody who had the money to put your words, in that printing press. But today, all you have to do is have a smartphone and boom, you're reaching the world. It's fantastic. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, it's like everyone has a megaphone these days. It's such a loud world that we live in, but also much more exciting because it's like there's more ears, people that can listen to what you have to say, and there's so many different voices now. And
absolutely,
it's a different world. And you mentioned something important, which is influence, and this show is predicated on how to build and leverage influence for different purposes, and in this case, with public relations. And I'm curious because you also mentioned relationships and the importance of building and fostering those relationships in the space as well. What goes into building a degree of influence in public relations, and how is that important in terms of being able to find ways to get your message out there, maybe in relationships, maybe in something else, but what's kind of the key to that?
Well, we always start with the why, like clarity.
Hmm.
Well, because you can go so many different ways. So we actually take clients through a positioning process so they can get clear on their distinct message. So first, we ask the question, why are you actually pursuing public relations? And when we're talking about public relations, we're talking about the good of humanity, right? So what good are you doing for the public? Because that's what they want to hear about. So when you get clear on what your message is, then you also have to figure out, well, what's the audience that will resonate with, right?
Right.
So and that starts with what's unique about you, and we're all unique. We all bring something of value. So that's really important for a publicist to take you through that process of why are you unique, and then what can you uniquely teach, educate, or inspire others about. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. How do you go tapping into that? Like, do you go and start figuring out a way to craft someone's unique and personal story, and then use that as like a launching pad for what they're trying to put out? Like, how important is that storytelling process?
The storytelling process is essential. For years I've called myself the storyteller to the media, because that's all I really feel like I've been doing for
Hmm.
decades, is crafting a story and then amplifying that story to our print and broadcast journalists and producers. Again, as humans, what makes us uniquely human is language, right? The storytelling process is what makes us uniquely human, and our experience matters. You know, we've got the dire wolves, right, that we've brought back
Yep, I saw
from
that.
extinction. So, they're not going to be having stories with each other, right? So, for us as humans, and to make sense and make meaning out of our lives, and to really have that optimal development that we want in life, like that, to be healthier, wealthier, and feel like we're in community at the best of our ability, it takes stories. It's essential. So then the stories have to be peppered with senses, right? We all love
Hmm.
a good movie. We love to have all of our senses titillated. Like, what are we smelling, tasting, hearing, feeling?
Hmm.
All the feels is what makes a good PR campaign. And then we just look at, again, what is the credibility of the client? Like, why are they the ones to speak about what we're speaking about? And then what's in it for the viewer, listener, reader, and then the call to action. The call to action doesn't always have to be a sales pitch. A call to
Hmm.
action can just be, hey, have a meaningful conversation with your wife tonight about what you're creating for your next adventure, your next travel adventure. Could be as simple as that, right? Because it plants a little seed in that listener or that
Hmm.
viewer, that reader, like, oh, I could have that conversation. Yeah, I'd like a little more adventure in my life and my marriage. We need to plan a vacation together, or
Hmm.
whatever the person's talking about, right?
Absolutely. It seems like the best ways to connect with a potential client or buyer or user or audience is always like based around emotion, like evoking some kind of emotion of excitement or happiness, or missing out, or even sometimes fear. But so many different ranges of emotion that you could stoke in someone, but they seem to be really strong drivers for getting someone to consider something, even if it's in public relations, if it's in advertising, whatnot. But yeah, that definitely seems to be a constant that I notice when I see like really good communications, PR, advertising being put out there.
Little known fact, the father of PR, Edward Bernays,
Hmm.
the father also of propaganda, his heyday was really last century. Um, he was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. So,
Mm.
a lot of what we've inherited for the last 100 years is predicated in his propaganda platform. That's something that I did in my master's degree studies. So it's really interesting. Um, I'm really up for the conversation of let's have a higher calling, right? It's all about the feels for sure. Because listen, you're not going to sit around a campfire and you're not going to tell a story unless it's scary, unless it's exciting, unless, right? Because that's what, when we're with friends, that's what makes us entertained. or what's
Yeah.
inspiring us, or has us pay attention when we're in school, right? Is those human emotions. But what if we actually talked about what's possible rather than complain about the state of affairs? Just imagine for a second if you were constantly being bombarded with the possibility of humanity, as opposed to that you stink and you're broken and you need to fix something, which is
Hmm.
what we experience today with all that clickbait, right? Not that there's anything wrong with the clickbait, but I'm just saying
Hmm.
let's have a more possibility filled conversation that drives the experience of our brains and bodies in the short life that we have. That's what I'm really up for. And it's maybe just a dream that I have that maybe I won't see in my lifetime, but I'd like to think like what would be possible if we started to shift all of our creators and all of our content online to something that was more possibility driven. That's exciting to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Michelle, as an expert, I do have to ask you, what are some, tricks, tips, hacks, things that you leverage to, get your clients more exposure that maybe other people aren't thinking about?
Well, let me talk about our claim to fame. So, my business partner, Drew Gerber, is the
Hmm.
.com guy. And so we use online press kits. Electronic press kits today are amazing, both for search engine optimization, but also just for succinct messaging when you're sending it to producers and journalists. So, you want to make it easy for journalists to access your materials instantly. One time I was whitewater kayaking on the side of a river and I checked my messages while I was on the river with friends. And it was a
Hmm.
Wall Street Journal. They were on deadline. They're like, look, I need images. I need all this stuff from your client. And then I can go to deadline in an hour. And I'm like, da, 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 da. And I just texted that online press kit link, and I was like, sweet. Like,
Hmm.
my friends were like, what are you doing? I'm like, work. So, and I mean, this was years before the pandemic. So I know
Hmm.
people, really have leaned into virtual work. But even more now that, we're, 5 years past the pandemic, you've got to have your stuff at a fingertips notice. And so that's really the hack you've got to be available and ready when they are, especially in this news cycle that's really 6 to 24 hours.
Yeah, it seems like the news turns over so fast these
It
days.
does. It does.
And it's like whatever, I mean, the adage that, today's news is yesterday's news, and it's moving so fast all the time, it feels like it's, if you try to cover something today, you've already missed the ball. It's almost like you have to try and get ahead of things in a lot of ways. And I imagine there's probably ways to like prepare, right? To like be able to jump on those stories like really, really quickly and, try to, find ways to, in the shortest time span possible, get something out there.
Well, it's really great to leverage seasonal news. So we have breaking
Hmm.
news. So we all know, hey, breaking news, and you can really piggyback off of that. But hey,
Yeah.
we all know the seasons of the year, right? Let's just think about it, right? At the beginning of the year, new you. Then it moves right into the love time, right? We're all about Valentine's Day. Then it's the
Hmm.
springtime where everybody's detoxing and getting ready for their bikini wear, right? Because it's hot weather. Everybody's like hot and bothered. So those are
Sure.
great relationships. And then of course we get into travel, and then harvest time, and then winter time, right? And it's a cyclical pattern with all newsmakers. And so
Hmm.
if you can predict what they're going to be covering and then add something unique, that's also a very good hack. Just like a calendaring system of topics, it really also works for journalists and producers, that when you're pitching them, and they'll sometimes actually put on their websites what they're planning for the year, and you can just pitch right from that.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I imagine, that is very cyclical and you have those seasons every year. So it's a little bit easier to plan for those things and make some content that's kind of a bit more evergreen. It sticks around a
Yeah.
little bit longer and it's seasonal. So that's actually a good trick.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about social media too. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but from a journalistic perspective, like if a journalist, like let's say you're trying to create some PR for a client, you're trying to get them out there, but maybe they're not so big on social media. Maybe that's not their thing. Maybe they're so dialed in and an expert at what they do in their industry and their profession that, they don't have time to try and generate, swaths of followers on Instagram or Twitter or wherever it may be, but they're really good at what they do. Maybe they're a leading expert at this or that, or they're fantastic what they do. Does that matter to a journalist as much these days, given so much attention and optics is placed on social platforms and how you appear online, or do journalists actually care more about what you're doing, the underlying value that you can share, and social is kind of like an added factor? Like, how do they kind of look at that?
It depends on the venue and the journalist and the producer. In general, social media followers and fan bases are an indication whether the public cares about your message. In the app, so that it does matter today. I remember a time when it didn't matter, but it does matter today. And with that said, if you don't have the social media following, you better have a PhD or a master's degree or some type of formal certification or influence inside your trade industry. There has to be a reason why the journalist or the producer is actually having an interview with you. So if it's in the absence of these national or international influences on social media, or you've got some type of higher education degree, then maybe you're just a local story, right? And they love that too. So, a feel good story about a fifth grader down the street, we all love to read that. But in general, if you're trying to, so the journalists are using social media to evaluate your credibility and the content style that you're actually delivering in the world. So, and let's face it, back in the day, it used to be the New York Post page 6, right? For all the entertainers who are like, oh, you got to make page 6 to be an it girl or it guy. Well, today it's always about Google page 1. So in general, the producers and journalists, are going to Google you. I mean, I'm old enough that I remember the first time I went to a date, probably 2001 or 2002, where a guy was like, I Googled you. And that was like, nobody did that then. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh, sweet. What did you find out? Right. But today, it's not only done with trying to find out if I'm going to like you as a date, but it's like, should I even trust you as a professional? Right. So it's very important.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I remember not even that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago at the most, it was like, people would just Google you for anything. And if you showed up on the first page, and that, you're a big deal. If you got Google giving you like an outline and your links and your photos on the first page, then it's, even bigger deal. Like, it's almost like being a celebrity. But now it's like, a lot of people, like, even if they look up, like myself, they don't even go to Google anymore. They just go directly to social media. And they'll be like, okay, does this person have Twitter? Do they have Instagram? Do they have TikTok? Do they have YouTube? Do they have other platforms like maybe Spotify, like if you're into music, or if you're a podcaster? And they're like, how many of these things does this person have? And then how much attention do they have on all these platforms? And it's like, it's kind of hard to balance that, I would imagine, if you're, a client, maybe you're not as outgoing with that kind of stuff. Is there a way to, and maybe this kind of ties back into relationships a little bit, because sometimes it just takes someone giving them a chance to kind of share their voice once or twice, and that kind of starts a bit of a catalyst. Building relationships, is that also kind of a key here as well, with some of these journalists or media outlets, to kind of get a client in the door the first or second time, so that they can, kind of start building that platform for themselves? Because a lot of times, it just happens, they're experts in their field, but they don't have that platform yet.
Relationships, really, it's the lifeblood of PR. It's everything, right? So you want to also think about who you are and your vibe and what you want to put out there. So I always, and I contribute over at Psychology Today, and I did a whole piece at the end of last year on the generations, right? So if we think about the type of social media, I always tell clients, well, if you're trying to reach boomers or Gen Xers, do Facebook. But if you're trying to do millennials, Insta all the way. What about Gen Z? It's got to be TikTok, right? So we got to think about what your vibe is. I've got plenty of CEOs or doctors, or like that's just not really their vibe, any of those, right? So I'm going to recommend LinkedIn to them, right? Because LinkedIn is really where they should be playing, because they're having that macro conversation in their trade. Like maybe they've got something about the body, they're a doctor and they're the only ones talking about that, and they've got some kind of special book and they're an expert in that. That's really a conversation then for LinkedIn, because there's tons of professional communities. I always like to think of LinkedIn as sort of like a trade show. You're going to a trade show, right? Whereas like Facebook, like people are just really trying to catch up on your scrapbook, where, Instagram and TikTok, it's different vibes on what you're actually trying to present to people. The funny thing about Russell Brunson, right, the creator of ClickFunnels, one of the things that we led with, one of his stories that we led with way back when we were with him, when he was with .com Secrets, where, before ClickFunnels, and we led with the potato gun story. So if you didn't know, Russell in college put online how to make a potato gun, and that's how he made his a lot of money while he was in college. And so we led with that story to kind of show his acumen on the internet. And then later, we used that to leverage then the relationships that we had with the top press about his success stories. There was a success story that he had mentored a woman named Jessica Hacker, who had been an expert in couponing. She was just a mom who loved to coupon, and she was doing coupon hacks, right? And so we got her on the Today Show with just those couple of stories, right? And I think it's important to think about, well, what's interesting about you inside your expertise. And then that's where the relationships start. A good sort of thing that we can all do is just notice how we are at cocktail parties or at a bar, or when we're introducing ourselves. How do we introduce ourselves? And that's a practice on that's a one-on-one communication that you can then amplify one to many using social media or press and so forth. So how we talk to each other at a party is very relevant. Then I'll end with this. It was kind of a long answer to your question. I've been with my husband now for 20 years. When we first started dating, I remember we were about to go to a party, and I was starting to message him, to like soundbite him before the party about how to speak about me. And he just looked at me. He's like, no, you're not soundbiting me before this party. And I was like, okay, but just, you need to know my preferences just in case you're asked, So, right. Because I wanted my company and my career talked about in a particular way. That's just key messaging. So we still laugh about that today, right? And every time we get ready for a party or a gathering, he's like, are you going to soundbite me? So.
Yeah, it's the way you work, and it's how your mind works, because you do it all the time. You can't help it.
Thank you. See, I'm going to definitely have my husband listen to this part of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll make it into a clip maybe.
Okay,
It's same thing for me if I go to any kind of engagement or party or conference, or when I'm trying to network with somebody. I always find myself like interviewing people like on accident, because I do it so much. Because I have other podcasts aside from this one that I've been doing for a very, very long time. And it's just kind of innate in the way I have a conversation sometimes. And I just start asking them, follow-up question after follow-up question, like, oh, and then why do you do that? Oh, and then how does that make you feel? And then like, what do you plan to do after that? And then I'm like, and then I have to stop myself, and I'm like, I'm getting too personal with these people. I just met them. It's been 5 minutes.
Well, some of them like it, right? So, that probably gives you an indication of like, because if you're that type of, then you want people around you who will answer the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. As if someone wanted to be in the same line of work as you, they wanted to go into public relations, how would they start building those relationships with journalists, with media? Is there a secret to doing that effectively? Is it as simple as pinging them and connecting on LinkedIn or sending an email and being like, hey, I'm so-and-so, this is what I do? Or is there like a more methodical approach to it that works a bit better in building those connections over time?
Oh, it's a great question. I think we're in a really lovely time. We, as a PR firm, we spend thousands of dollars for our media contact list. And of course, we have our relationships that we've honed over decades. However, in today's marketplace, you can use AI to really look at, like, well, help me with the research on the top podcasters, the top newspapers in this, with this audience, this specific target audience. I have a client right now who wants to reach type A executives who are about to retire, and the surprising thing that happened in her campaign was, now that we've got massive layoffs that we're talking about, people are being forced into retirement, she became relevant in a whole different way. But we can actually do research so instantly. And I would really, I used to go on interviews and tell people, like, oh, use this source or that source. And of course, I have all that too, but really use AI, the service of your choosing, to kind of just look to see who are like, so if you just, like, let's say you like the Wall Street Journal and you wanted to have 50 venues like the Wall Street Journal, you're going to find that with, I call it my bot, right? I have a name for my bot that I speak to her every day, like she's my personal assistant and stuff. It's really fun. But it's interesting to then see, like, what is uncovering. And then I go back to my traditional ones. At the end of the day, to your point, it's still the dial and smile, right? If you're not calling on a phone to say hello, then you're dropping into somebody's DM, or you're actually starting a relationship on LinkedIn to say, hey, I noticed that you cover this, and I loved your last article, and I wanted to introduce you to somebody. It's really, and you want to be succinct. I think that the mistake that most people make when they're introducing that relationship, just like dating, you don't want to go on and on about yourself, right? You want to say, sure, hey, let's get to know each other. And I think that's the best approach. Also, lately I've been, something shifted. I started getting all these pitches because I do contribute at Psychology Today. Do you know that not one pitch I've gotten this year actually says, I'm pitching you because you write for Psychology Today? What? So I'm getting like these random pitches about, hey, wouldn't you like to talk to this person about this holiday? No, I'm a publicist by trade. So you need to, like, identify, oh, I read your article on the generations at Psychology Today. Thank you so much. I thought this about it. And by the way, it made me think that you might like to meet this other person. So just think about what's natural in conversation when we meet people at a cocktail party, right? You wouldn't just go right up to a person and then start talking about yourself. It's just not natural. But yet, right, we send these weird emails to each other.
Maybe just the medium of the communication is different. It's like texting, right? Like, people text each other ways they probably would never approach each other in person. Like, hey, hello, how are you today? Like,
right. And I think it's just, how do you build trust? And so I actually had a phone call from somebody this morning. I was like, and it was a human, it wasn't a bot. And I was like really taken aback, actually, on my landline. And she was lovely. And it all of a sudden I started to trust her because she was human with me, and I just noticed my own feelings in the process of where we are. I mean, we're at the effect of so much communication. We also have to ask ourselves, well, how do we like to be communicated to? And that's what I always think about when we're communicating with other people. Well, if it's a broadcast person, they probably want a phone call or some type of, maybe a video introduction. But if they're a print person, right, most of their stuff is print and words, they probably want a nice lengthy email introduction. So think about the target person you're communicating to. It's just like, what's your love language, with the people you're dating.
So to wrap up the episode, the final thing we're going to do is something called rapid fire, where I'm going to ask a quick question, and all you have to do is give me a quick response, whatever comes off the top of your head. We'll have fun with that.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. So the first one is, name one figure, could be an influencer, celebrity, whoever, whose PR you really admire.
How about Brene Brown? She really talks about shame and vulnerability. And I always like to think that, shame makes us hide, but vulnerability really invites us to show up. So I love what she's doing, and she's really leveraging her research.
Awesome. Awesome. What's your biggest pet peeve in PR?
Lack of transparency, for sure. I mean, clients really hate being left in the dark. So that's one of the reasons why we did our online press kit. So we show everything. We like pull back that Wizard of Oz curtain. You can see who we pitch, what we've said, whatever level of detail you want. And I really would invite all my cohorts in marketing to do the same. It really makes a huge difference. It really does.
Absolutely. That's a good one. What type of content do you think currently gets the most media attention?
Well, I think content that really addresses what people are struggling with right now. So, what are people dealing with in real life around health, like, and wealth and love and, real solutions, and how you're providing that for real people. That's what makes relevant storytelling for sure,
Absolutely. For communications and marketing through influencers, what do you prefer most? Bigger, more mega influencers with millions of followers, or micro influencers with smaller followers but more engagement?
I think, if you're selling something, go micro, but if you're wanting to change a conversation, go mega. So if you think about micro influencers, it's really about trust. It's about maybe a trade industry or niche. It's about conversions really. And then mega, the reach, the fame, the awareness. So if you're a micro influencer, let's say like a fitness coach or a blogger, that's really better for product launches or sales. But if you want brand prestige, I would go with your mega celebrities. And I think that it's, the same. If you're looking at public relations, if you're looking at trade or local influence, then that's really about sales conversions. If you think about the trust that you have in your local regional area, and where general media is really like that broad awareness, general consumer awareness. So I often talk about it in terms of trade or versus general consumer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sweet.
How do you measure PR success? Is it more about quantity or quality?
Mm. Well, I like to think that it's the client that says, right? Just like that old thing in sports, it's not anything until the umpire calls it. So the client gets to choose whether they want quantity or quality. Quantity is really about reach. Quality is about credibility. So, some of our clients want the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and we've gotten that for them. And others want 30 podcast interviews, and we've gotten that from them, So I think that back to that why, like, why are you doing PR? And then how do you, reach those goals and then measure that accordingly is what's important.
Then last one, and I had a question for this one in particular, but since there's, I think, a better example of this, I'm going to use it instead with the dire wolves, since those have been kind of all over the media lately. But if you had to create or spin a story on the dire wolves being de-extinct, what would be the angle that you would take in terms of creating some press around that?
Yeah, so it's always about the why, right? So why, one of the things that you think about, like, well, if we think about animals in general, if we think about natural disasters and what causes animals to be extinct, I am in Asheville, North Carolina. And so we've just been at the effect of fires and hurricanes. And, we live in a beautiful area, but it's just been devastated by natural disasters. So then that becomes, well, how is a community coming together to rescue this animal, right? How is this animal a symbol of survival during a disaster, or what is causing an extinction, right? Or what are the family stories behind the animal, right? So there's the scientists who are actually behind these dire wolves. There's a whole storyline behind that. And also just the animal's journey and how it reflects our human experience. And, what about fear? What about extinction and hope and resilience, all that stuff. So, it's not just about the animal, it's about why. Why are we talking about this animal? What makes it? And you'll see in most of the coverage that they're talking about Game of Thrones. And the reason why they're bringing that in
Yeah.
is because there's so many of us who can relate to Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
That's why they're throwing that in. And they're also like they're weaving a storyline intentionally about it all, you know?
Absolutely. I've seen a lot of the Game of Thrones references, obviously, because that's where people know what a direwolf is from. But
Right.
also a lot of Jurassic Park stuff too,
Sure, for
with
sure.
the
Right.
CRISPR editing. Yeah.
Right. And now we're going to be talking about the woolly mammoth next. And so then we start to
Hmm.
talk about those macro conversations, or why are we even here on the planet? And will we be taking out, a meteor hit the earth and then take us out? I mean, all those conversations, it goes back to, remember, we're sitting around a little campfire, and what's capturing our attention in that storytelling around a campfire. And what works in PR is just what we amplify around a campfire with each other as humans.
I love it. Michelle, you truly are an expert in public relations. There's been so much great knowledge and content, advice, wisdom shared on this episode today and in this conversation. So really do appreciate you taking the time to share and answer some of these questions and give back to the audience, because some of them may want to go down this path someday, or may need this kind of advice or help, or may want to apply this to themselves professionally or their own business. So again, really appreciate the time, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
My pleasure, really.
Awesome. And where can people go to catch up with you, learn a bit more about what you're working on, follow you on socials? Where would you send people?
Yeah, so I would go to wasabipublicity.com. It's like the green stuff in sushi.
Yep.
So wasabipublicity.com. And hey, if you guys want a complimentary PR session to really to see if it's even for you, you can sign up for that on our website.
Awesome. We'll put the links in the description for the episode below so that they can find that real easily. Again, Michelle, appreciate it. Thank you so much. Take care and talk to you again soon.
My pleasure.